The one thing that was holding me back from thriving as a homemaker wasn't something I could physically see. It wasn't about physical clutter or life chaos. It had everything to do with how I manage my emotions, my words, and my self control in every aspect of my life. I used to think that self control was all about resisting the obvious temptations, right? The carrot cake calling my name or overspending to stay on a budget. What if I told you that it's just as much about how we talk to the people closest to us? That gossiping and venting about her husband or slandering our kids can create division within our relationships. Or the self control on things like substances or social media, or even the validation that we get from comparing ourselves. These small habits quietly creep into our lives, distracting us from what matters the most. Taming our words and monitoring these habits is the key to unlocking peace and purpose, not just for us, but also for our families. When we have self control in the way we speak and in the choices we make, we can dramatically shift how we show up as wives, mothers, and homemakers. It's more than just saying no to temptations. It's about creating a life of intention and focus that allow us to thrive in all the quiet moments and the small choices that shape our daily lives. This is the third video of the Titus 2 Women series, and I'm so excited to share with you what I've been learning about some powerful and often overlooked areas of self-control. We'll be talking about slander and the modern forms of slander, and then we'll be diving into how we can build the discipline and focus we need to thrive as homemakers. It's not just about saying no to the big temptations. It's about learning to how to show up in the small moments with self-control so we can finally break free from the overwhelm and distractions. So Titus 2 says, the older woman likewise, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given too much wine, teachers of good things, that they admonish the young woman to love their husband, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husband, and that the word of God may not be blasphemed. At first glance, it can seem pretty straightforward. Don't gossip, don't get drunk, and that's only part of the picture. But there's so much more to it than the surface level. Let's start with slander. The definition is making false and damaging statements about someone. For a very long time, I thought it was only about gossip, saying negative things about other people behind their back. And I was like, check, I don't do that. Perfect. When I looked into the passage a lot deeper, I realized that slander is so much more than just talking behind people's back. It's about the tone, the narrative, and the impact of our words, especially about those people closest to us. It's about how we talk about other people in all contexts, about how we speak when we're frustrated, the stories that we create in our minds, and even when we say passing. Those can shape our hearts and influence the relationships we care the most about. I got to overcome a lot of things, but venting about my husband was thankfully not something I needed to overcome. Before our marriage, I learned the value of respecting him by not venting or complaining to other people about our situations. And I'm very grateful that was something that was taught to us before we got married. However, while we had that understanding, in the early years of our marriage, I still told him very clearly what I thought about the things that bother me, and in the most counterproductive way, meaning a lot of scream, lots of manipulation, and just not nice stuff. And there were also moments where I would let my frustration with him play out in my mind. I would create these little narratives about situations that bother me, and these stories had a negative spin, obviously. And over time, these thoughts start to feed my frustration and my resentment will start to grow. What started as a small, almost innocent thought about a situation would eventually turn into the story that I painted Micah into this bad person. Even if I wasn't voicing my frustration to other people, I was still engaged in slander in my mind, because the way we frame and interpret things, especially when we're frustrated, can have a profound effect on how we view the people closest to us. If I keep on telling myself negative stories about Micah or the girls, I'm not only damaging those relationships in my own heart, but also feeding the narrative that could eventually come out in my actions and words, because I would eventually believe them, as if they happened in real life. It took me about 7 years of marriage to realize that slandering Micah in my mind was just as harmful as speaking poorly about him to somebody else. 7 years. So that should give you some hope. It created distance between Micah and I and distorted my perception of him. And this is why it's so important to tame our tongues and take control of our thoughts. What we say, even when we're frustrated or upset, it matters. Our spoken words and our internal dialogue shape the dynamics of our relationships, and it can either build up or tear down. To me, that's a form of addiction. And that was the one thing I needed to overcome. And I'm so excited to tell you today that I've been sober for a little while now. So what does this mean in a practical sense? When we think of slander, it's easy to picture typical scenes, gossiping over coffee or spreading rumors behind somebody's back. In today's world, slander has taken on a more subtle way that can easily slip under the radar. There are tons of different ways out there, and for the sake of time, we'll stick to the most common: social media. Social media has become a space where slander can thrive, often in the most subtle ways that we may not even recognize. The platform encourages public critique, passive aggressive posts, and silent judgment, behaviors that can harm relationships, feed negativity, and damage our hearts. As biblical women, we are called to use our words and even our thoughts to build people up, not to tear them down. The first that comes to mind is critiquing somebody's post or leaving a negative comment. These actions might feel justified in a moment, but they reflect a critical spirit. Even silently judging other people based on their posts, whether it's their lifestyle or choices or opinions, it plants seeds of pride and comparison in our hearts. I'm not talking about having a different opinion and voicing that. I'm talking about plain negative comments. We're often quick to form opinions, and slowing down to reflect on how our thoughts align with God's grace is an important step in practicing self-control. When I had social media, I typically wouldn't leave an outright negative comment, but I was definitely guilty of passive-aggressive behavior. If I saw a post that struck a nerve, I would repost it and added a little passive-aggressive status, suddenly agreeing to the original message. It wasn't just about sharing my thoughts, it was about proving a point in a way that felt justified and was ultimately harmful. What's the good in that anyway? Another area I noticed on social media is engaging in arguments over comments. I didn't do this online, but I would do this in person. I used to thrive on proving people wrong. It wasn't even about being right. I just wanted to correct them and make my point. And that attitude stemmed from pride, which had a strong grip on my heart. Why did I feel the need to prove them wrong? That between them and God. And all it did was revealing a lack of humility and character and grace on my part. What I found too is that when we're behind a screen, hidden by usernames, it makes it even worse. When we're Bond Girl 123 and her picture is not showing her real face, it's easier to say things we might never say face to face. It often leads to harsher words and disrespect and a complete disregard for other people. It fosters a sense of detachment from the real life consequences of our words, and those words can still wound deeply and reflect poorly on our character. The truth is, in the grand scheme of eternity, what matters is the state of our hearts and whether our actions reflect Christ. Social media also opens the door to comparison. And this is one of the main reasons why I decided to quit social media. I sometimes reactivate my Facebook for homeschooling ideas, and I typically deactivate it after. But as we scroll, it's easy to measure ourselves against other people. Their picture-perfect moments, their accomplishments, their possessions. This comparison often leads to slander in forms of quiet criticism or pridefulness. For some, it may be, well, she must have a lot of help to manage all of that. Or, that's nice for her, but she doesn't have the struggle that I do. For me, it was more like, oh wow, they're on a million trip this year. Maybe we should go on a trip. Or, wow, it seems like they've got it all together and I'm still figuring out how to make an okay enough meal. And these thoughts may seem small, but they reveal dissatisfaction and envy in our heart, pulling us further from the contentment God has called us to have in Him. And seriously, whoever posts pictures or videos mid-fight with our husband, or when our kids are driving us crazy. Venting is another behavior that often happens on social media. It may feel like an outlet to release frustrations, but venting online can quickly spiral into slam. Sharing grievance about our husband or child or a friend or even a stranger, it not only creates a public narrative that diminishes their character, but mainly it shows people our true colors, diminishing ours. It doesn't solve any issue and only increases our own bitterness. True self-control redirects those emotions toward prayer and private, productive conversations. I'm not against social media by any means. I think it's a great tool for those of us who want to use it productively. I personally chose to deactivate all of my social media. I only had Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, but I deactivated those because I know how I was using those platforms. I know that for some, it may be extreme to not be connected on social media, but for me, whoever I want to stay connected with, I will reach out personally, or they will. Anybody else, I like to call them circumstantial relationships, meaning that once upon a time, in that circumstance, we had a relationship. Now that we are no longer under that circumstance, we no longer have that relationship. Or maybe should I say, it's not strong enough of a relationship that we are willing to get out of our comfort zone to actually keep that relationship. Take any circumstance. How many times did I leave unemployment and said, I miss you guys already, we definitely will stay connected, and it never happened. They're not bad people, and we're not bad people. It's just that the relationship was not strong enough for us or them to make an effort to stay connected. Same for neighbors or homeschooling communities or whatever. Social media has many benefits, and it's also a space that require constant discernment, self-control, and a commitment to use our words and actions to glorify Jesus. By stepping back and reflecting on our motives and choosing grace over critique, we can transform how we engage online, making it a platform for encouragement rather than a place where slander quietly thrives. It's easy in our modern culture to overlook the importance of sobriety and moderation. Everywhere we look, TV shows, social media, and even casual conversations, it normalizes it. It even makes it look cool. And drinking is portrayed as a way to unwind or celebrate or fit in, often without any thought of the consequences. And that's what I did in university. I fully embraced this mindset. I partied and drank from Wednesday to Sunday every week. How I managed to work full-time and go to school full-time and stay alive, it's still beyond me. But that's what I did because it was what everybody around me did. I wasn't rooted in any belief, so I just did what society taught me to do. I would finish work and feel the need to unwind because I talk to people all day. Most people don't believe me on this, but I'm actually an introvert. The way I recharge is by being by myself. And so to recharge, I would get a glass of wine, and then I would typically have a class. And then a girlfriend would call, and we would hit a club. That lifestyle not only ruined my liver, but it also distracted me from what really mattered. And I didn't know Jesus back then the way I know him today, but the idea of moderation and self-control wasn't even on my radar. I was living according to what felt good or seemed socially acceptable, rather than considering the long-term effects on my body, mind, and soul. When Titus 2 calls us to be not addicted to too much wine, it's not just about avoiding being drunk. It's about living a life with moderation and self-control. This way of living helps us stay focused and disciplined and intentional with how we show up for the people around us and how we carry out our responsibilities. It's about resisting things that distract us or harm us so we can live a life with purpose and clarity. So how does sobriety lead to discipline? The connection lies in how we manage our desires and impulses. Sobriety helps us practice saying no to things that are not good for us. When we do that, it builds discipline, helping us make choices with intention. Discipline is not just about avoiding bad habits. It's about being mindful with the small and everyday decisions we make. Sobriety gives us the strength to say yes to what's important and no to what's a distraction. Discipline allows us to manage our actions, including how we speak. When we're sober-minded, we're less likely to speak out of frustration or anger. Instead, we can respond thoughtfully, using our words to build other people up rather than tearing them down. This is where taming the tongue comes in. When we have self-control over things that we say, we reflect more of God's love and His wisdom. In a culture where indulgence is often seen as normal, the idea of sobriety and moderation may seem strange. Everywhere we look, we're encouraged to indulge in every pleasure and satisfy every desire. The truth is, embracing moderation doesn't mean that we're missing out. It actually brings freedom because we stay focused on what matters and avoid getting distracted by the noise of the world. It helps us live the kind of life that God has called us to do, and a life that's focused on loving Him and loving other people. As we get better at making intentional decisions, it affects everything in our life. Titus 2 reminds us to live with intention and self-control and focus. Sobriety and moderation are not deprivation. Embracing these principles leads to a life of peace and purpose and wisdom. So learning to practice self-control in all areas of our life is essential for thriving as a homemaker. As we focus on taming our tongues, avoiding slander, and embracing moderation, we create an environment of peace and purpose that extend to every aspect of our homes. When we shift our mindset, taking care of our words and habits, we not only benefit ourselves, but our families too. This is the third video in the Titus 2 Woman series, and if you've missed the first two where we talk about the Titus 2 calling and reverence, be sure to check them out in the description.